Hello everyone, my name's Lewis and welcome to Deep Dive. Today we'll be diving into Benny Safdie's The Smashing Machine. Now this is the first major release from Benny Safdie, which was one half of the Safdie brothers, which I anticipated after their breakout hit Good Time and then followed it up with the even more successful Uncut Gems. I assumed that they were going to be the new generation, the big collaborative duo within cinema, especially because their emergence coincided so much with the departure of the Coen brothers and them then also going to make more solo work. And in regards of the Safdie brothers, I actually had quite of a strong opinion on them. I don't know if it coincided with what everyone else thought, but what I thought of the Safdie brothers' work was that they were very, very capable filmmakers. I wasn't as big a fan of Good Time because I thought, although it was an interesting film, there was a lack of sentimentality. I felt as though it was surprisingly, in its totality, a bit of a mean-spirited film, even though there were elements between the brotherly bond and whatnot, and at the end it semi-redeems itself. I think that it dwelled too much in a negativity which I feel is kind of typical of cinema of this era. But then they followed it up with Uncut Gems, which was a film I thought was fantastically structured. It really succeeded in this notion of the classic cinematic experience, in the sense that I'm watching a film and I'm having a visceral emotion when watching it. Just as a piece of entertainment or as a thriller, it succeeded so well, keeping you on the edge of your seat. You wanted to know what happened. However, again, my downfall with it is probably its depiction of the world. I felt that it was showing me a world which I wasn't too interested in. And yes, there is the level of watching people that you are familiar with, or quote, bad people, and trying to find ways to humanize them. However, on that level, I don't think that it succeeded. It was showing me a world that I know exists and wasn't doing much with it other than showing it. And so although I've been critical of their work, I definitely think that within this generation of filmmakers, there has always been absolutely something there about them, which I'm drawn to and I've been interested in, especially seeing how their careers were going to carry on after that. And the first thing that we have is the release from one of them, after now their partnership has ended, with The Smashing Machine. The Smashing Machine is a biopic, and with that comes all of the pros and cons that you expect with biopics in cinema. The biggest barrier that they have to overcome is that at the end of every calendar year, towards the Christmas period, towards the award season, there is just this slew of biopics that are seeking to be the big Oscar contender. And with that, they kind of feel like this almost factory line manner of making art films. They all kind of serve the same purpose. And the major flaw, I think the thing that ties them together in why they kind of fall short, is that take a film like A Complete Unknown, for instance. A Complete Unknown is a film that serves its purpose. It's a film in which you watch it, and if you're unfamiliar with the source material, then you are engaged with it to a certain degree. And that's it. The big struggle is, what does the film offer beyond the subject? If I could compare them to something else, it's the equivalent of reading a Wikipedia article of something that you've just discovered, going all the way through it to the end and thinking, oh, that's interesting, and never returning to it again. Whereas a great biopic will intrigue you so much within the subject matter, but also you will have something to discuss beyond them, because the subject or the person, whatever it is that they want to represent something beyond the immediacy of what we see. And in regards to The Smashing Machine, I must say that perhaps one of the things that you can immediately say about it is that it is a traditional biopic in which Mark Kerr is the subject, and that's what the story is. But what I will grant it is that within this biopic framework, there is a strong sentimentality, which was one of the things that I thought was missing from a lot of the Safdie brothers' work. So even though it does immediately fall into that pit that a biopic often does, there is something more to it. The Smashing Machine is a character study, and it's a character study about Mark Kerr, who was a pioneer for MMA. And throughout the film, if you are an MMA enjoyer, Then there are a couple of dotted Easter eggs in and around it. Baz Rutten is in the film, playing himself. Alexander Usyk also is in the film, not playing Alexander Usyk. But there are little nods here and there for people that enjoy the sport. It's nothing major. I was actually quite surprised at how little there was, but some of the niche cameos and appearances for people that are aware of like the old school Pride era beginning of UFC, then you'll get a little bit of enjoyment from it. But the focus of the film is Mark Kerr, almost exclusively. And for many biopics, I would say that this would be a negative. But here, I don't think it is. We follow Mark Kerr through his great victories and his great triumphs and all of the awards and success that being a professional athlete bring at the highest level. But the film also hones in on the brutality, what happens when you lose, what your body has to go through. And one of the major hinges with Mark Kerr was his addiction to pain medication, something that would alleviate the sensation of constantly putting your body through the most brutal endeavors. But because the film is so honed in on Mark Kerr, the thing that will differentiate it is the style of the film. Like how is the film presented? What's the manner of storytelling that we're seeing? And the most obvious comparison that you can bring with a film like The Smashing Machine is probably someone like John Cassavetes, which is someone that, I mean, if you've watched the Safdie brothers' other films, it's not as though his influence wasn't there before. But here in particular, I think Benny Safdie really wears the influence of Cassavetes on his sleeve. It's all over the film, that rawness of the human condition, that kind of cinema verite style of how you present a story. But the film is also not just a copy and paste of Cassavetes. Benny Safdie does have his own style. And to compare the two, you would say that Cassavetes is someone that he really relishes in those downfalls and follies of people, as though like the suffering of people is what verifies them. That's what validates them as being a human. When they have that realness about them, that's the most important part of the human condition. The Smashing Machine isn't necessarily that though. The Smashing Machine kind of revels in this idea of Mark Kerr as a successful athlete. It enjoys the fact that he does have these highs. We're supporting him throughout the film. And it's not as though the entirety of his human condition is based on the lowest of his lows. For instance, one of the criticisms that you could have of a Cassavetes film is that it's all over the place. The sense that drama comes and goes and there is no reason behind anything. Sometimes characters react in ways that are so unnecessary. But from the Cassavetes perspective, that's how human beings are. Sometimes we're irrational. Sometimes we have things inside of us that we can't explain. And so action is our character. And we don't need a cause and effect. That's not how life works. Elements of that are within the Smashing Machine. When it comes to the drama of the film, there isn't really a narrative. We're just watching Mark Kerr. And you would assume that when we see a man struggling with drug addiction, that this would be something that hinges all the way throughout the film. And it's not. It's a part of the film. And it reemerges casually, but it's not as though Mark Kerr is defined by this kind of confining screenplay that you would typically see in biopics. Benny Safdie allows him to be a bit freer. He allows him to move and he allows him to grow and he allows him to kind of keep returning to the same follies. We see instances in which he needs to call his sponsor because he's feeling temptation to fall into the same vices again. And normally you would anticipate this kind of the lure, the temptation to constantly arise until there's a relapse, until there's some great catharsis or some element of high dramatic tension would snap. And the film doesn't have that. It's just that this is a character that undergoes this and it's kind of dramatic. There's kind of a bit of tension there, but he has control over it because that's the character that he is. And there's other elements of the drama in which he does fall into these other vices, which you think he should have more control over these things. But that's what fleshes him out as a person. It's what makes him feel more of an authentic character. When I was watching the film, I have to say I was very aware of the Cassavetes influence within it. But then I also remembered, when I think back, how many years is it now? Like just over 15 years when a film like The Wrestler came out by Darren Aronofsky. And you can really see that kind of influence on this film. But again, even with that, you see that Cassavetes' touch within it. And you can kind of draw a thread between the film, because that's what I think the Smashing Machine kind of is. This hybrid of a film like The Wrestler and something like The Killing of a Chinese Bookie in terms of style. And it exists kind of in the middle of these two films, wherein you have this suffering, beaten down, worn down warrior that you see in The Wrestler, and it's kind of like this constant need for redemption. And so there is a pitiable, mournful aspect about it. And stylistically, I think that the film has this cinema verite edge. There's a brilliant shot in which, after losing his first fight, Mark Kerr walks backstage and he possesses not this rage, because that's not in his character. It's just this indignation, this kind of the world that he had control of before is just collapsing in on him. And we get this close proximity in which we just track him, and the camera stays handheld really close all the way through the back. And what he does is that as Mark Kerr goes into his dressing room, stays outside of the dressing room and looks in. And it's this fantastic touch that Benny Safdie clearly has. We transition from this close, proximate world in which we feel tied to Mark Kerr to having him be on the boundary of us. We are peering in on his world. And so we do feel like these observers to what's going on in his world. Even though the film is about Mark Kerr, exclusively about Mark Kerr, the storytelling methods that Safdie implements show that it's something more, or at the very least, it's from the mind of someone that is attempting to imbue more depth in this film than many other filmmakers would. Because it seems to me what the Safdie brothers have done, and I can only speak for Benny Safdie exclusively now because we've seen one of his films, is that they don't do the Cassavetes thing in which they take us into unknown worlds and show us a manner of living or a kind of person that we're aware that exists, but we don't know them intimately. We don't really know them. What they do is that they reintroduce us to worlds that we're very familiar with. You can see it in Good Time, Uncut Gems, and with this. It's a period piece in the sense that it's in the late 90s and it's dealing with the UFC and MMA, but it never treats the audience as if we don't know what's going on. It always seems to treat us as though we are incredibly familiar with these worlds, because we are. And because of that, it seems to me that he's able to capture a world which doesn't feel like a pastiche at all. It's so easy now, especially knowing that the 90s is 40 years ago almost, that it's very easy for them to be shown in this retro, romanticized style. And this doesn't possess that. It shows things very, very authentically, but also at the same time through a lens which, yes, it bolsters and highlights the cliches of the time, but in a way that is fond without it being too overtly sentimental. You know, if I just simplify it, nothing in the film feels phony. Although, I will say, choreographing fight sequences, even with fighters, is still hard. And occasionally you can see it. I think that some of those double leg takedowns, they shot them away from too far. Anyone would have seen them coming from a mile away. But in speaking so much about Mark Kerr in the film, you have to speak about Dwayne Johnson and his performance. And another thing about biopics is, because we know that they're portraying someone and there is a formula for how that person walks and talks and thinks, a lot of the time, especially when prosthetics are involved, it can become just a form of mimicry. And a lot of the times we can confuse good acting with a good impersonation, which there is an element to that, but then you're not embodying that character. You're not thinking as that person thinks. It's all superficial. But here, the performance of Dwayne Johnson of The Rock, it surprised me. It surprised me at how good it was. And not just at the level that, he's able to portray Mark Kerr, but that me growing up, I saw The Rock as a performer. And so with that is that superficiality. He plays the villain. He's able to play the hero. He's able to play the archetypes very well. But this notion of anything beneath that, of a depth, I wasn't entirely sure that he was able to fully possess it, and here he absolutely does. I think it's a rather fantastic performance he gives. And I think that because the film displays Mark Kerr as a fully formed person with a very subtle intensity to him. He has an incredibly warm, nice demeanor, and yet beneath that surface is the suggestion that there lies a person of intensity, of obsession, of competition. There's nothing about them which is a bad character trait, but there are flaws within there, mainly drug addiction, that obsessive mindset, that need to control things for things to be perfect, which when people are accommodating for that, everything's fine. But the moment that things fall to the wayside, the moment that you experience a loss, the moment that people start to push back on your flaws, the cracks start to emerge and he tries to retain them. And you see someone, the portrayal of him, who has so many character traits that are incredibly admirable, but at the same time, they're also flawed. And I think that that depth emerges in a variety of ways from Dwayne Johnson. It's not just that Mark Kerr has these differing elements to him. It's a thought process that you can see emerge during an interview. It's these momentary reflections he might have on his life during a fight or during training. It's watching him attempting to stand by his own reasoning for why he does what he does, even at the same time knowing that it's flawed, and you can see it. You can see it in the performance, and it's such a surprising level of depth within it. And again, the same can be said with Emily Blunt. She plays the partner of Mark Kerr. You can see scenes in which clearly they were able to improvise with one another, and it comes off as incredibly authentic, and you believe it. You believe it when you're watching it. And I have to give further kudos to Benny Safdie for being a filmmaker where you can see that he is one of those filmmakers that have emerged that is clearly of a school of the classic canon of cinema. He wears the homages that he has to cinema on his sleeve. There's a great sequence in which they go to a theme park, like a carnival, in order to show the disparity and the kind of childlike nature of Mark Kerr. We see Dawn, played by Emily Blunt. She goes on a little ride, and it's an homage to the 400 Blows. There's another great metaphor during the same sequence where you see Mark, who's going through this inner strife, and we see this demolition derby of cars smashing into one another. And it's very, very classic cinema. I think ultimately what I get from The Smashing Machine is that within the film, there is a strong style of Safdie there present, and occasionally it falls just below the surface and we don't get to see it in its totality. And this may just be a case of an artist developing their lens, because I hope he does stick to this style. I hope he does flesh it out, because I don't want it to be in the shadow of Cassavetes, because clearly it doesn't need to be. There is something strong and individual within there, because what the film does, it does great. The criticism that you can have of the film is that it doesn't do a lot. And yes, I can fully understand people viewing this film as something where they watch, they enjoy, and there is nothing to gain beyond the first viewing. And to a certain degree, I do think that. However, I think that there is enough of a humanism within here. I think that the portrayal of a character in which it could have just been another biopic that we do forget, I think that there is an element of a soul within it, which I'm glad to see, because I felt that that was the one thing that took away from the Safdie's work. For me, this is a very strong humanist perspective of a story, even if that's all it is. And again, ratings, I think The Smashing Machine is a 7 out of 10.